right, welcome. And today we're going to be talking about End of the World and Hard-Boiled Wonderland, and specifically End of the World and Hard-Boiled Wonderland, and not Hard-Boiled Wonderland and End of the World. This is very, very important because confusing translation things. So here we go. We're talking about Haruki Murakami's book, and there are two versions of this book. One by Alfred Birnbaum, translated by Alfred Birnbaum, and this is the version that most people are familiar with. But last year, the book was retranslated by Rubin to include a significant amount of material that was cut from it when it was originally released. So, bit of a why did I pick this book? Obviously, I wanted to read the retranslation. Rubin is my personal favorite translator of Murakami, and this book, when I first read it, and the reason that it took so long to get to it was Hard-Boiled Wonderland at the End of the World was actually the last Murakami novel that I read. Obviously, this was before Uncertain Walls came out, and I'd saved it for last specifically because I know for a lot of people it's their favorite Murakami book. So I wanted to save the last novel to be something really special, and it turns out that I did not jive with it at all. I don't really care for Murakami's two heavier sci-fi books, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and 1Q84. God, the other big Murakami work. Sci-fi in general doesn't do much for me. Neither does fantasy really. I tend to prefer more grounded and surrealistic things to more what would you call that? Just straight fantastical. So in that sense, that's why I got it. I knew I would read it, but I had no interest in getting into it right away. I wouldn't call it my least favorite Murakami novel. That's still, it's kind of tied between 1Q84 and South of the Border, West of the Sun. I really do not like South of the Border, West of the Sun, but at the same time, 1Q84 is so overwritten that I can't get into it. So anyway, it was finally time to come to it and address it and give the retranslation a try, and I'm really, really glad I did, because I don't know if it was when I read it, I don't know if it's the translation difference, I don't know if it's that Uncertain Walls reuses the same short story as Hard-Boiled Wonderland as so if you don't know, the End of the World sections of this book are based on the same short story that The City and Its Uncertain Walls draws from. It's a short story novella that Murakami originally wrote that he wasn't happy with, and he revisits multiple times in his work. So this time it worked a lot better for me. I enjoyed it. I still am not, it's not my favorite Murakami book by any stretch of the imagination, and part of that is because even though they're light, I find the thing between the semiotext and the system and whatnot to be just not quite my cup of tea, but I really enjoyed it this time. So to get into the plot, you have the story is split into two narratives, End of the World and Hard-Boiled Wonderland. Hard-Boiled Wonderland takes place in what is 90% modern day Japan, well, modern day in the 80s. It was written in the 80s, and follows a Calcutech, and basically you have an information war going on, and there's two sides to it. There's the system, which works to encrypt data, and then there's the factory, which works to decrypt and sell data on the black market. So the main character is what is called a Calcutech, which basically is an encryptor for the system. So his job is to encrypt data, very simply. And he goes to the a person that hired him, a doctor, a professor. Actually, the translator's note, Rubin, notes specifically that he wanted to use doctor instead of professor because the guy, I think he said he doesn't have a formal PhD, so it felt better to him. Anyway, the point is, he goes to this scientist. It's a really, really skilled scientist who wants him to encrypt data using a very new, revolutionary encryption process. And the point is with this is that the ones doing the encryption are people using their minds as the black box through which the information is fed, and the outcome is the encrypted data. So the main character goes to encrypt this data, and in doing so gets wrapped up in a sort of conspiracy involving the system, the factory, and a few other forces at play. Meanwhile, in the parallel story, The End of the World, you have somebody coming to a walled-off town in which he has to separate from his shadow, which contained all his previous memories, as he tries to figure out his place in this walled-off town with unicorns and other fantastical things, all while working as a dream reader with a librarian who is a female and steadily he grows attached to. So that's the overall plot. To whom would I recommend this book? As always with Murakami, it's a fine place to start, but the only thing that I would say specifically with starting with End of the World is it's way more sci-fi than most of his other works. And I see the phrase sci-fi thrown around a lot, and I want to be very, very clear. Reading it this time, I got huge vibes from Blade Runner, but not in the sense that there's flying cars or in the sense that there's spaceships or anything like that. It's not that kind of sci-fi, but it still nonetheless has the attitude of cyberpunk. The main character is very cynical. The world is subtly dystopic, and big corporations control everything, and corporate warfare is basically the dominant feature of the story. Corporate warfare and espionage and things like that play heavily into the plot, as you have this sort of cynical, middle-aged, alone main character, younger than middle-aged, but main character trying to figure his way through a plot that's bigger than him. So in that sense, it's very, I don't want to say very unique, because it's still got a lot of Murakami vibes, but in that sense, if it sounds interesting to you, absolutely, like, this is a fine place to start with Murakami. If you're more into that kind of fantastical plot, then absolutely give this book a go. Otherwise, I think that if you just want to read one book to understand Murakami and why he's so popular, I would still say you'd be better off with Kafka on the Shore or Wind Up Bird Chronicle, because I think that's more indicative of his work as a whole. But, if you've read either of those books, if you've already read a Murakami book, if the story sounds interesting, like, just pick it up. Very easy to read. There's not much, I think, that's objectionable about it, although I know some people have issues with the way that one of the characters is sexualized, but I'll get into that later. So, I just recommend it to anybody who reads the synopsis and thinks, that sounds interesting. So long as they go into it with the expectation that it's a Murakami book, it's a bit of a slower burn. That's especially one thing about the translation, and I guess since this is the recommendation section, this is kind of the best place to touch on the translations. I talked in my Dance 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 video about how Brimbaum likes to alter a lot and add a lot of flavor of his own sort of style to Murakami's writings. And to a lot of people, they prefer that. Not only that, whether it was Birnbaum or the publisher, a lot has been trimmed out of the original. And a lot of what was trimmed, not all, but a lot, was longer descriptions that go on and on. But I do think that, for example, there's an image I saw on Facebook when I was looking into Dance 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 translations that compares the Brimbaum translation to the Rubin translation of Wonderland. And it basically talks about the protagonist coming home and putting away his shopping. And the Birnbaum translation is about 3 lines, and the Rubin translation is like 6 lines. It's a whole paragraph. And in isolation, it doesn't, I think, give you the full picture of what the translation is doing, because it's stated that the character is very meticulous when he goes out and goes shopping, that he actually only owns a car because one time he went shopping, got too many things, and needed to get a car and in order to carry all his stuff. So the only reason he has a car is because when he goes shopping, he buys a lot of stuff. He's very meticulous about what he does buy, but he goes around roaming, buying things that he doesn't need. I guess when I say meticulous, I mean, like, he's selective in the sense of when he's in the store, he'll look for like at one point he picks up a nail trimmer and he gets this really fancy nail trimmer. But at the end of the day, like, does he need a nail trimmer? Is it like necessary? No. So he ends up with a lot of excess stuff, but he very much enjoys his shopping. So the idea, at least in terms of this extended version of him putting things away, is to reflect that, okay, now that he's gotten all this stuff, he has to then come home and is just as meticulous in his process. I guess that's a better way of saying it. His process is meticulous in terms of putting it all away. So I think that's kind of the thing where the Birnbaum translation definitely has a different vibe to it. A shorter, quicker, snappier, and again, highlighting the cynicism, bringing a lot of turns of phrases that aren't in the original and things like that. Whereas I think that Rubin's translation is much more truer to the original and captures a lot more, I think, of the subtleties and nuances in the character and in what the text is trying to convey about the character, while also, for those important things that were cut, giving a lot more details to them and embellishing them in a way that makes the story a lot easier to understand. So, in that sense, I know a lot of people who've read the original will suggest that you go with the original. I personally actually think that you're better off going with Rubin's translation, because while it's not as short, as clippy, and doesn't have the same turns of phrase that I know a lot of people like from the original, a lot of people say that it reminds them sort of a Raymond Chandler novel, which I do still personally get from Rubin's translation, but I can see where they're coming from. The Rubin translation is just objectively more accurate to Murakami's own voice. But if you... So I think you're better off reading the Rubin version and then going and reading the Birnbaum version, and deciding there, because that way you'll know what Murakami was writing, know what he was going for, and have a better idea of that. And then you can kind of opt which style you prefer after that. That would be my suggestion, but I know that there are quite a few people who would disagree with that and swear by Birnbaum's version. And I hope I've at least laid out a little bit the difference between the two. So moving forward into the pros and the cons of this book. Pros, you have the story moves at a pretty solid pace, kind of. The alternating chapters are kind of annoying for me. They chafe for me in the sense that at the start of the book, the end of the world stuff is very, very slow, and the hard-boiled Wonderland stuff is very quick. To the point where not only are they super disconnected, but they come together. It takes a long time for them to come together, and the end of the world stuff, like I said, it's slow. It has a lot of world building. It's the entire atmosphere or vibe of it is different. It's very laid back, whereas like I said, the hard-boiled stuff has that noirish cyberpunk mystery angle to it, where things are at stake and you definitely understand the stakes. And having those side by side really can end up feeling like stop and go. But I mean, I personally didn't have this problem this time through, for reasons that I will get into in the transition between pros and cons and themes. But I remember it being very annoying my first time through, and I remember, and I've seen a lot of people say like they either really preferred one type or another. So, but on their own, I think the story doesn't have a whole bunch of fat to it. It's kind of crazy to think that in actuality the hard-boiled Wonderland stuff only takes part in 2 days. I think is about the timeline. 2 days for the whole story, whereas the end of the world passes multiple seasons. So very, very, it's sort of a pro and con together. I think that individually the two storylines are well paced, but when put together, they're kind of at odds. I guess even kind of towards the end, it was easier for me because I already knew the story. Another pro, I like a lot of the themes of the book. I like this one's kind of subjective. Okay, because as somebody who has read all of Murakami's work, and in many cases multiple times, I find that Hard-Boiled Wonderland to me kind of feels like the link between earlier Murakami, Hard-Boiled, Wind, Pinball, Sheep Chase, and then you had this book, where I said in my last video, that Dance 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 feels like Murakami finding himself and going on and exploring many of the themes that would go on to define his work. I need to slightly correct myself in the sense that a lot of those themes, a lot of the exploration of the self, actually begins in Hard-Boiled Wonderland. Really specifically Hard-Boiled Wonderland, because Wind and Pinball and Wild Sheep Chase are all very societal focused, whereas Hard-Boiled Wonderland is the first Murakami book that really focuses on the self and the mind to the point of having well, okay, I won't get into that because slight spoilers. So in that sense, this is really where you start to see Murakami coming into his own, but it also, to me, kind of serves as a link to understanding Murakami's later works if you know how to contextualize it properly. For instance, there is a part where where a character mentions that since the dawn of the modern era, of course, science has emphasized human psychological spontaneity, but if you ask what spontaneity is, no one can give you a decent answer. That's because no one has fully grasped the secret of the elephant's factory within us. Men like Freud and Jung have published their deductions, but all they did was invent a lot of jargon to enable us to talk about these things. They made things more convenient, but it did nothing to establish human spontaneity. If you ask me, all they did was add a little scholastic color to the science of psychology. And when, coming off of Dance Dance Dance, where I mentioned in my Dance 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 review that the whole book is sort of an exploration of Jung's psychology and structure of the mind and whatnot, it really, reading this in Hard-Boiled Wonderland and looking at Murakami's works, it's not necessarily that Murakami thinks that Jung's exploration of the psyche is necessarily like correct, or that he's advocating for it. It's that Murakami is exploring, whether it's psychologists or philosophers, their concepts via his own work. And it's not that their concepts are right, it's how he sees the reality of their concepts reflected in the being, but his being is still very much his perception of what the human condition is. So, for instance, in Dance Dance Dance, you have him talking about Jungian themes and psychologies, but that doesn't mean that he explicitly believes in that, because later on in like Wind Up Bird or Kafka on the Shore, you have both characters entering a kind of collective unconscious realm, a realm of the collective unconscious, but that collective unconscious is not necessarily the same as Jung's collective unconscious. It's in some ways maybe has even more to do with like a Buddhist concept of a collective unconscious, where he's using these to explore a more universal, at least in terms of Murakami's beliefs as a whole, concept. So one of the pros for me reading this, and this might again be subjective just to me, is how Hard-Boiled Wonderland really helped me sort of better understand where Murakami is coming from in a lot of his works as a whole. Another con, I think if you're coming to this, again, is this a pro, is this a con? I don't know. I'm going to throw this out here as a con for people who really want the sort of sci-fi aspect. It's really surface level. It really only exists to explore these ideas or to add a bit of tension to the novel. If you're coming into it, again, like Cyberpunk, where, or rather, like Blade Runner, specifically, where you want details about the androids and how they function and how the world functions with androids, in the same way that, like, what is the system? What is the factory? How does the world function this way? Is it a sort of drastically different society? The answer is no. Like I said, it was slightly dystopic, but I think it's slightly dystopic only because you're following a character who is in the middle of this information war. If you didn't have that perspective, if you were following the perspective of, say, the librarian character in the story, not the one from the end of the world, but the one from Hardboiled, because there's two librarians, it's not confusing at all, I promise you. It's actually not when you read it. But anyway, when you follow, if you were to be one of those outside people, the world would pretty much just be the exact same as it is today, which can make me kind of petty for wishing that the story didn't have all these sci-fi elements and just kind of ran with what it had. But at the same time, it also can frustrate people. But it is what it is. Like I said, if that's a pro, whatever. If it's a con, whatever. One thing that I'll also bring up as a con is that the lady in the pink skirt, the girl in the pink skirt, because this pink suit. Everything she has is pink, so it's a pink suit. S words. Shirt, skirt, suit. Take a shirt, add a skirt, it's a suit. Anyway, she is... the main character is constantly commenting on her looks, her appearance. He constantly calls her fat, but I don't think it's fat in an insulting way. I think it's sort of what we might call like chubby. Like he calls it a very aesthetically pleasing, like round, maybe curvaceous. I don't know. Point is, I can see a lot of people taking an issue with the way that this character is constantly sexualized, especially considering she's 17. I actually tried to look up what the age of consent in Tokyo was in 1985, because I know the age of consent in Japan was 13. They raised it to 16, but that's not the whole story, because prefectures have their own age of consent, and pretty much every prefecture is 18 nowadays. But I know that wasn't always the case. I know once upon a time, 16, I think it was considered legal. So I'm going to give Murakami the benefit of the doubt and say that when he's talking about the 17-year-old girl, and this 17-year-old girl is talking... Well, okay. And when the main character says that he would sleep with this girl because the girl herself is very interested... She's very sheltered and consequently interested in sex and having sex, and mentions wanting to have sex with the main character. And he never does... he turns her down. I'll spoil that, but he never does go through with it. But he does say that he would if circumstances were different. I'm going to assume that this is a different time period with different laws, and it wouldn't have been considered statutory rape at the time. But I don't know for certain. But it's there. I'm throwing it out there for anybody who would have issue with that. I think there's a lot more to the character. She is way more capable than the main character in many, many ways. She's a very, very capable individual, and in the end does decide to live on her own and look after herself. But she is not a very deep character, and a lot of her screen presence, her screen time, is dedicated to her physical appearance and attractiveness. So that's out there for you to decide. Another sort of semi-con about this book is the characters are not well defined. They play their roles, and they're just defined enough to have maybe like one or two dimensions, but it's to the point where most characters don't even have... Well, not most characters. None of the characters in this book have names. And I appreciate that that's by design. Like, you have the girl in the pink suit. You have the professor. You have the protagonist. You have the girl in the library. You have the library girl. The cab driver who loves reggae. The gatekeeper. The power station attendant. I don't remember what he's called now. But anyway, the colonel. The characters are given names based off of their appearance or their roles. So it's definitely not a book that is meant to be a character study or have any deeper characters outside of the main character. So if you're looking for a Mei Kasahara, if you're looking for a Lieutenant Mamiya, I just looked it up. If you're looking for an Oshima, if you're looking for a Hoshino, you're not going to get that here. This is very much the main character's story, and all the other characters exist in service to that story. Again, because it's so focused on the mind and a person's individual sort of heart, I think it's okay. I think it works, but it's definitely the type of thing that, how do I say this? You might notice it. If you're looking for something more, then you're not going to find that here. And it is something that I think that Murakami's future works did a lot better job exploring. Even Dance 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 did a much better job of exploring it, or of having interesting characters, or not even interesting, but more multidimensional characters. So I've talked to you about a few cons lately, but one last pro that I want to get into is the way, when I talked in Dance Dance Dance, I mentioned that I found the anti-capitalist themes pretty annoying, but that in the way that they were very abrupt in the first 50 pages, especially, of the book. The character would just rail on and on and on about capitalism and how much he didn't like it, and how it was destroying things or changing things and whatnot. And I think that, ironically, one of the this is minor side criticism or observation in Hard-Boiled Wonderland, manages to capture the same criticism and cynicism of late-stage capitalism in a few lines that I think a lot of Dance 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 did, at least with regards to the idea of capitalism bad. I think that Dance 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 does a better job of exploring an individual's relationship living in a capitalist society, but I think that in terms of that message of capitalism bad, Hard-Boiled Wonderland accomplishes in like one paragraph everything that irritating hammering home that is entirely unnecessary in Dance Dance Dance. So it's a great example of accomplishing the same thing but without hammering it home quite so hard. Okay, so as we transition into analysis, this is where I would usually say I'm about to get into spoilers, so stop listening here. But really, there's one thing I want to say before I get into full-on spoilers, and that's that, again, being that the city and its uncertain walls and Hard-Boiled Wonderland, specifically the end of the world parts, come from the same short story, I think it's easy for people to overlap a lot. I've seen a lot of people say that you should put some space between reading these two books. But here's my takeaway from it. If you go back to my Colorless review, I mentioned that Colorless really felt like revisiting a lot of the concepts of Sputnik Sweetheart. That was it. Yeah, Sputnik Sweetheart. But exploring it from the view of someone much later on in life. And much the same way, like Sputnik Sweetheart deals with an immediate loss. Colorless deals with how that loss affects you 16 years later. I think that Killing Commendatore is also reflects a lot on Murakami's past works. I think thematically it very much stands on its own, but you see a lot of inversions of events in Wind Up Bird Chronicle. Very surface level include it's in not an urban, it's in a rural place instead of an urban one. The character is mostly isolated instead of constantly being surrounded by other people. The well is not something that he goes into, but something that he merges out of at the end. Things like that. Just these sort of inversions to the tale. He leaves his wife rather than his wife leaving him is another example. They're plot elements, not necessarily thematic elements, but I definitely think that in many ways it's a sort of invert or retake on some of those same ideas. And I mentioned Uncertain Walls as a reflection of Hard-Boiled Wonderland, but until rereading Hard-Boiled Wonderland, I did not appreciate just how true that is, to the extent that it really goes back and adds, to me, a certain layer of nuance to both of these stories. to the point. And I think that this is where, on the surface, a lot of the things are similar, but thematically they come to entirely different conclusions or reach entirely different ends. So without going into spoilers, one of the things that I really want to sort of demonstrate with this is the town in Uncertain Walls, the city, is trapped in a kind of stasis. The girl at the library is unable to reciprocate any of his feelings. The clock tower doesn't even have hands. When you talk about time or the passage of time to these people, it means nothing to them. Time means nothing to them. Nothing really means anything to them. Whereas in Hard-Boiled Wonderland, while it is true that they don't care about time, time still exists. In fact, he's given an exact time to arrive at his dream reader's job. The clock tower has hands. The girl that's in the city talks about losing her father and her mother. This is a place with a history that isn't just for show, like I feel like it is in Uncertain Walls. And by for show, I don't mean that like thematically to us it's just a facade, we don't need to worry about it, but that in the context of what the city is meant to represent, the decay and the ruins are meant to imply a history without actually having one. Whereas with Uncertain Walls, or not Uncertain Walls, with Hard-Boiled Wonderland, the city very much feels like something that is breathing and moving, and those differences ultimately culminate in a different conclusion and create something that thematically might be the same story, or not thematically, that might on the surface in terms of its elements be the same story, but these changes make for something radically different in terms of the themes and the feel of it. And it's something that I don't think I've ever seen anybody else really mention, which I don't think makes me like the first or anything. Just, I don't know if it's something that a lot of people don't pick up on or don't subconsciously appreciate or care about, or I don't know. But it's definitely something that I wanted to bring up. And now I will go into analysis and I will go into spoilers to wrap up this thought. So if you're interested in hearing the conclusion of this thought and don't mind slight spoilers, and don't mind spoilers, then keep listening. At least spoilers specifically for the end of the world part. And I'll finish out this thought, which is to say that in the end of Hard-Boiled Wonderland, the conclusion is that he separates from his shadow and lets his shadow go back while he returns to the town, because because he believes that the girl's heart is in the town and he can find it, and that she will someday love him, because kind of one of the themes of the story is that people live on in our memories. I put a thumbtack in that. Okay, and then in Uncertain Walls, it's him leaving the town because the town is in stasis. He can never get from her what he needs because she is just a memory. She is unable to reciprocate his love utterly because her time has stopped. She is not a person. She cannot grow and change and evolve with him. She's just a memory. So it's ultimately better for him to leave the town, to leave the dream reading with the boy in the yellow submarine, who is ultimately a part of himself, but to leave that with another part of himself and to move forward with his life and meet new people. And I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition between the two, because when Murakami talks about the story sticking with him for so long, I can definitely see that being sort of questioned, and because it's almost two takes on the same thing. In the first one, it's, people do live on in our memories, and people matter even after their death and whatnot. But in Uncertain Walls, it's also suggesting that there is a flip side to that life needs to go on, that you can't become so hung up on those memories that you cease to move forward. And that's where I feel like a lot of Murakami's later works feel like him reflecting on his earlier works and coming back and adding more to them. And where I really enjoyed reading the parts of The End of the World for the way that they gave me a deeper insight into Uncertain Walls and actually made me appreciate Uncertain Walls more than I did before. So that's kind of the end of talking about how those two books juxtapose each other. To sort of go back to that pin that I mentioned earlier, it makes me feel really, really dumb, though, because I never appreciated that the old dreams were basically memories. And when he talks about reading dreams, I take it as he's talking about, in both books, pulling out the vague essence of emotion that comes from old memories inside of ourselves, because we don't remember details very well. We don't remember sort of exact events. Human memory is very flawed and imprecise, but we tend to remember emotions, how something made us feel, how we felt at a certain time. We might remember a small detail or two, but the emotions really are what stick with us. And in a way, the sort of reading of the old dreams in both books, I take as a kind of not regurgitating, but digging up those old emotions, those old feelings, and experiencing them once again. And I feel like an idiot for reading Uncertain Walls as many times as I did and not seeing that and not mentioning it in my review. So the other big theme going on in this book is the human mind and the complexities of the human mind. But not just the mind, but also the heart. And this is where I didn't talk about this in the translation part, and I probably should have, but oh well, what's done is done. When the Japanese talk about kokoro, it's a little bit more than just the heart in the concept of the physical organ, because there's also atama. There's like the mind, rather. There's kokoro, but then there's also the mind, and a lot of what we would say, I feel it in my heart, or that kind of expression, that kind of use of heart. Japanese people would say mind for that in terms of that's the word that they would use, would translate closer to mind rather than heart, but the meaning is sort of the same. It's somewhere between the two. So in the original translation, Birnbaum uses mind, but Rubin uses heart. But the reality of the sort of word is somewhere in between. There's not really a perfect word that captures both. It's sort of the fusion where for us, heart is a little bit too emotional, but to use the word mind is to cut out the emotional aspect of it, whereas the Japanese word, the Japanese sort of meaning behind it, is somewhere in between the two. It's a sort of conscious decision, or subconscious, but still holding or feeling with emotion. So if you read the Birnbaum translation, you're going to get the mind aspect of it, but you're going to miss out a little bit on, well, you're going to miss out heavily on the emotional side of the story. But one of the things I think with Rubin's translation is that it can end up coming across a bit trite, in the sense that, we carry people with us in our hearts and we remember them that way, which, yes, we do, and I'm not denying that, but it's also missing a bit more of the complexity of the term than something that is necessarily quite that trite. So, and the big thing with the book is the primary theme exploring that sort of heart-mind space, the sort of subconscious where those two things meet, your sort of conscious thoughts and rationalities, but also your subconscious desires and wants, and how those two interact. And it also serves, for me, as a good demonstration of why I like surrealism as a means of exploring these concepts versus the sort of ultra fantastical fantasy or science fiction, because I think at one point in the story, when they're trying to explain why the end of the world exists, and they're going into the pseudoscience of it that was entirely made up for this, obviously, the in-depth explanation of the circuits and whatnot takes up a lot of pages, and it's fine in the sense that it explains the function of it, but it's also not fine in the sense that it's distracting from the thematic essence of what's going on. And what I like about surrealism when it comes to exploring people's subconscious and exploring the more subjective aspects of our experienced reality is that they don't have to take the time to stop and explain it, which serves the dual purpose not just of emphasizing how unexplainable a lot of these things are, but it also keeps the focus less on the rational why is this happening, which is fundamentally so against the surrealist concept of not everything is rational, not everything has to make sense. So in that sense, while there is this exploration of the mind, and there are aspects of Hardboiled Wonderland that aren't explored in City and Its Uncertain Walls, I think specifically when it comes to the mind as a the city as a representation of a person's inner heart, mind, psyche, sort of inner self. I like that the way Uncertain Walls does it better, because it doesn't try to rationalize why the city exists. It just lets it exist inside the protagonist's being, and that's that. And it doesn't get bogged down with unnecessary details or world building or things like that. So this kind of goes back to where there's the sort of theme that is going on there, but how you explore the theme, I think it gets bogged down a little bit in these sort of sci-fi trappings that kind of distract from it. But, at the same time, I can't say that... One thing that I am uncertain of is where the Mercs fit into this. They're called the Mercs in Rubin's translation, and the Inklings in Brimbaum's translation. They obviously play a pretty substantial... They're meant to symbolize something. They're metaphoric of something, because you never actually see them. They're a constant threat. They're constantly running from the Mercs. They're constantly warned of the Mercs. And at one point... they do go into the Mercs' lair, and they do suffer some of the influences of the Mercs in the Mercs' attempts to capture them, but we never see the Mercs. So the Mercs are undeniably real, and their negativity and hatred of humanity is undeniably real, but as to exactly what they're meant to represent, I didn't pick up on that this time. I don't get the sense that they're just there to create a kind of antagonistic force in the story, or to make the story more interesting, but it could be that that's the case. I just don't think Murakami is that kind of writer. But yeah, the Mercs I'm a bit uncertain on. But the one thing that I really want to, for me, was really so stood out to me reading it this time, aside from everything else I've mentioned about the differences between Uncertain Walls and this, or Murakami's work as a whole, is... when the main character learns that he only has a limited time left to live, the sort of sheer mundanity of the way that he spends it is, I think, really captures something about our current lifestyle and the way we live. Because it's such an interesting question, and, well, okay, it's such a boring question in a way of, well, if you found out you only had 24 hours left to live, what would you do? And everybody thinks, they do this some crazy bombastic thing, go out with a bang, rent a big fancy car, drive into a wall, whatever, eat a bunch of ice cream, have a bunch of sex. I read a story where there was like a woman had 3 months to live, so she left her husband and slept with 300 guys and then died. But I think the reality for most people, and what this main character sort of realizes, is like it's such a big question, and we always operate under the belief that there's going to be more time, that even the idea, even the time needed to process that, like, oh, I'm going to die in 24 hours, you'd probably still find yourself doing mundane things. Like he goes to the laundromat because the girl's clothes are drenched and she can't leave his house. without she doesn't have a change of clothes, so he has to go take her clothes to the laundromat to dry them, and he's just kind of sitting there on a timer, hours of his life fading away, just kind of sitting at a laundromat, going around town, goes to rent a car, buy some beer, buy some nail clippers. Like, it's so mundane, but at the same time, what would you even do? It's such an overwhelming proposition, and the sort of joy that I get out of Murakami's work is the way that he infuses crazy aspects into the mundane. But in this sense, it's almost like you have this crazy aspect or this crazy scenario, but reality, the reality of the way that it's faced is so mundane onto its own that it ends up saying just a lot about humans and people and creatures' comforts. Because, I mean, I know, like, if I found out that I was going to die in 24 hours, I'd want to clean up, like, my house or my apartment, because I would think that somebody would come and need to clean it up behind me, and I wouldn't want to leave that for them. I'd want to figure out, who to give my things to or whatnot, which the protagonist in this doesn't even have to worry about that because he's alone with no friends or family. So just the idea that, it's the last 24 hours of your life and they're just, time is ticking down and you're doing mundane things with it, even as those precious moments are slipping away. I think it just really spoke to me. It really captured something about what it means to live, and something I've always felt, is just that every second that you're alive, life is happening. There's a quote, like, life is what happens while you wait for it to start. And, to put it in my favorite quote from True Detective, do you recognize the good times when you're in them, or do you have to wait until you get ass cancer to realize that they've passed you by? And it really is just a reminder of something that I always try to tell myself. I always try to, when I'm walking in the morning, take in the world around me and appreciate the things around me, because life isn't the moments that you go on vacation, that you, meet new people, or you have a big crazy party or whatever. Like, those events matter, don't get me wrong, and they're a part of life, but life is your day-to-day, and it's what you should really be focusing on is how are you living your day-to-day, not how are you living the moments in between your day-to-day. And the way that this character just goes about his last 24 hours really brought that home to me. So that's Hard-Boiled Wonderland. I'm very glad that I revisited it. I enjoyed it much more this time through. Like I said, whether it's because of where I'm at in my life, whether it's because of the time I read it, whether it's because it's the new translation really helped flesh out the story that much more, whether it's because Uncertain Walls came out, or if it's all these things, I enjoyed it substantially more. And it's gone from being one of my least favorite Murakami works to just being in sort of the same tier. I would say there's only two, like I said, there's only two works now that I would say I don't like by Murakami. So join me next time when I talk about The Third Realm, continuing on with Nosgard as I go through The Third Realm to get onto The School of Night, which has been sitting on my shelf for a while, and I want to get to it, and it's frustrating me, but we've got stuff to get through even between now and then. So see you next time.